Hey guys, got another video here. This is a picture that I took in the backyard where there's some roots sticking up out of the ground. I messed with the photo using the iPad a bit, up the contrast and different things. Went for this look kind of like a bad photocopy. I wanted to see if I could do the whole thing with only stippling. I had seen some really old photography from like the 1840s, and they have this really cool look about them where there's this graininess and some of the dark colors that if you were to do it in pen and ink, you would normally ink it solid black. Weren't quite black. They were just this really dark gray, and I felt like stippling would really lend itself to that. So that's what I attempted to try to capture with this drawing. So the piece of paper that I used here was 14 by 17 inches, and that's quite a lot to stipple, but I made the project even bigger by halfway through changing my reference photo. The first photo that you saw was just going to be like a two-tone drawing, which I thought was going to be kind of cool, but halfway through I realized it was a little bit boring, so I ended up reverting back to a previous photo before I had kind of washed out all the details. But I do think that that was necessary. I feel like the original idea just didn't have enough interest, not enough detail. But that's the first pass of stippling done there. Just blocked in the areas that I knew were going to be in shadow, and try to be mindful and leave the areas that were going to be in light or were going to be leaves, leaving those white at this point, because you can always go back and add more. And I feel like with stippling, my approach is always just build it up slowly, and that way you don't overdo it, because you can't go backwards after you do that. But this is where it starts to turn the corner, and you get to add in the details, and it becomes a little more fun because you can start to see where you're headed. But with stippling, it's pretty simple. With these sticks, you just have a little line of stippling that dots are much closer, and then you just try to blend that out. You don't need to be real precious with that. You can let the blending part be rough and patchy looking. It just adds to the illusion or the rough wood texture. So a lot of these darker areas that are in shadow, I made multiple passes on, again trying to build it up slowly, because personally I feel if you want the details in the lighter areas to pop, you need to make sure that the shadowed areas are quite dark. And also in these darker areas, I tried to let the shadow part be patchy looking. I didn't want it to blend out super smooth, because there's a lot of detail in there that you really can't make out in the photo. And I think with pen and ink, you just need to hint at that, and then when you see it, your mind fills in the blanks and creates this illusion of detail that it's not actually there in the drawing. And that's another reason I want to try and work smaller on the next one. Not only will it save me a ton of time in stippling, but I feel like working on these bigger drawings, you really need to make sure you make time to take a step back and take in the whole drawing at once. That way you can see whether or not you're, creating the texture that you want. Whereas with a smaller drawing, I feel you're viewing it, you're working on it at the same distance you're going to be viewing it from. So it's just a little bit easier to keep track of that, in my opinion. And on the bottom half of the drawing, I tried to leave it pretty abstract, like the photo that I showed you in the beginning. All the detail was washed out from messing with the contrast and the shadows and different things. So I tried to recreate that here and simplifying it where I needed to. Now I'm just kind of bouncing around, making certain areas darker and adding details. Now that I have a clear idea of what the whole drawing looks like, I can afford to be a little more brave in my decisions and push that contrast, hopefully making the whole thing pop. But here I'm just going back and covering up this area. I had left this area lighter because there was a beam of light through one of the photos that I thought I would try to capture, but where I had switched reference photos halfway through to the more detailed one, I had taken the stippling too far in that area and I wasn't going to be able to pull it off. So here I'm just trying to blend it back out to where hopefully you can't tell. So the pins that I used were just microns. 0.1 was the size, which is quite small for the amount of stippling that I ended up doing. But I felt like it was necessary. I wanted to try and capture that vintage photo look. And I feel like if you use the bigger nibs, they won't blend into the smaller pins quite as nicely. And I wanted to try to create that uniform grainy look across the whole drawing. Now I know they make stippling guns or stippling pins, but as far as I could tell, they all use a ballpoint pen or their own special pen. Now I have seen some videos on YouTube where they make them out of a tattoo gun, where you can just connect whatever pen you want to, which is an interesting idea. Something maybe worth trying in the future, where I guess you could just block in a lot of the area that you know is going to be dark with that, save your wrist a little bit, and for the finer details just switch back and do those by hand. But really that's about it. Not much left to say about it. Definitely some points in the drawing that I wasn't quite sure if it would turn out all right. A lot of just trusting that it would and keep working at it. In the end, I think I like it. I feel like it's nothing else. It's a step in the right direction, hopefully. But already working on some other drawings for future videos. So if something like that interests you, be sure to check back from time to time. Hopefully I can get one of those up in a timely manner. But I appreciate you guys watching and spending your time here, and I will see you later.